I was 15 years old. My mom called me into the kitchen. She said, "Jay, we're going to Kentucky to attend the funeral of my great Aunt Mildred." I said, "Who? I never heard of this woman." My mom said, "It doesn't matter. It's my homecoming. I haven't been home to Kentucky in years and years, and I'm using her funeral as a reason to go. And we are going to pay homage to her." My dad then looked at me and he said, "Homage means you're going to put your rear end in a car and we're going to Kentucky." So off we went, my dad's brand new 1954 Ford Custom. It had 3-speed on the column. It had a small block V8. It had no air conditioner. And we were going to drive 6.5 hours down to Kentucky in the July 90-degree heat. 6.5 hours later, we arrived at the metropolitan area, sparkling area called Paducah, Kentucky. And from there, we went to the Paducah Old Time Christian Church. We went in. There was about 100 people there. It had no air conditioning, so the old ladies, they used those popsicle fans with the cardboard, and they could really move the air. So I'm sitting there, and then out comes the minister. The preacher comes out. And this guy is dressed in a white robe, starch stiff. But the most interesting thing about him was he had this huge gaggle of red hair. I mean, it was a 6-8-inch gaggle. He looked like an Olympic torch. And then he pointed his finger right at me. And he said, "There's nothing I can do for Sister Mildred. She's gone on to her eternal reward. But I can save your souls in here. You must come and meet God, and you must bow to him, give yourself to him, and ask him to forgive your sins, or you will all be in hell." And he was pointing right at me. And so I sat there for the next 25 minutes, and the only thing I remember now, 60 years later, is he kept saying, "It'll rain fire and brimstone. It will rain fire and brimstone." I don't know what brimstone is, but I know this. If you go to an Episcopalian church, you perspire. But if you go to the Paducah Old Time Christian Church, you sweat brimstone bullets. After about 45 minutes, he excused us all to walk by the casket out to our cars. So I walked up to the casket with great Aunt Mildred, and she was in there. She was a little woman. She had her hands folded across her chest like this. Her skin was pale. I looked at her and I said, "She's dead." And she was. Then I got closer to her, and her face was gray and very odd looking, but somebody, I think the undertaker, had painted 2 big red rouges, splotches of rouge on her cheeks. I think it was to make her look alive. But what she really looked like was the flag of Japan. So out we went into the cars. We drove over hill and dale, around the square, over the bridge and under the water and all kinds of places. And finally, all the cars just pulled off to the side of the road. There was no cemetery. So I got out of the car and I went to the guy behind me. I said, "Do you know where the cemetery is?" He went like this. It was up the top of a hill. My dad got out and he said, "No 50-year-old beer-guzzling people are going to be able to carry that woman up that hill." And sure enough, they had recruited a bunch of young guys. But the hill was a dirt path up to the top. And as these 6 guys were carrying her, they jostled her around and things. I thought one time that they were going to drop the casket. And had they dropped it, it would have turned into a bowling ball, and about 10 old people would have been bowling pins. But we finally got up to the gravesite. I knew it was a gravesite because there was a hole in the ground. And there was these guys standing back there like this, looking forlorn, but they had gloves on, so they were the grave diggers. And at that point, the pastor came out again. And he said, "Would anybody like to take one last look at Aunt Mildred?" And one of her daughters, who was probably 75 years old, raised her hand. "Yes, yes, yes, I would." So he gave the nod to the undertaker. He opened up the casket, and there was Aunt Mildred, discombobulated. She had rolled onto her side. One of her eyes was open and one was closed. The rouge on her cheek had melted and ran down into the corner of her mouth like it was bleeding. Her mouth was open because her upper denture came out. And everybody went, oh, oh. And then, because she was sort of laying on her side, suddenly she flipped over and threw her arm out of the casket. And some lady yelled, oh my God, she's alive, she's alive. And the undertaker ran over and put her arm back in the casket, closed the lid. And we all stood there in silence. Even the preacher didn't say a word. And after a minute, we all walked down the hill. My mom and dad and I, we didn't say a word all the way down to the car. When we got to the car, my dad started to drive away, and in a minute or so, I heard my mom start to giggle. And then I heard my dad start to laugh. And then I started laughing. And then all three of us were laughing. We were hysterical. We would try to stop and tell the other person why we were laughing. We couldn't stop. We were hysterically laughing. I don't know how long we laughed. But I know this, for 3 days, my stomach was sore. So when I look back now 60 years later, I think, you know, my mom would be proud of me up here talking today because she knew I would pay homage to her great Aunt Mildred because I smile when I remember her funeral. Thank you.